So Isaiah 58, and if you don't have it, it's also on the screens. And I'm starting in verse 1. And the word of the Lord reads this: Cry aloud, spare not. Lift up your voice like a trumpet. Tell my people their transgression and the house of Jacob their sins. Also, I'm reading from the New King James Version. Yet they seek me daily and delight to know my ways as a nation that did righteousness and did not forsake the ordinance of their God. They ask me of my ordinances of justice. They take delight in approaching God. Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen? Why have we afflicted our souls and you take no notice? In fact, in the day of your fast you find pleasure and exploit all your laborers. Indeed, you fast for strife and debate and to strike with the fist of wickedness. You will not fast as you do this day to make your voice heard on high. Is it a fast that I have chosen, a day for man to afflict his soul? It is to bow his head like a bulrush and to spread out sackcloth and ashes. Would you call this a fast and an acceptable day of the Lord? Is this not the fast I have chosen, to loosen the bonds of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and that you bring your house to the poor who are cast out? When you see the naked and you cover him, and not hide yourself from your own flesh, then your light shall break forth like morning. Your healing shall spring forth speedily, and your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard, and you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, and he will say, Here I am. If you take away the yoke from the midst, the pointing of the finger and the speaking wickedness, if you extend your soul to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted soul, then your light shall dawn in the darkness, and darkness shall be as noonday. And the Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your soul in drought and strengthen your bones, and you shall be like a watered garden and like the spring of water whose waters do not fail. Those from among you shall build the old waste places. You shall rise from the foundations of many generations, and you shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of the streets to dwell in. If you turn away your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy day of the Lord honorable, and shall honor him, not doing your own ways, nor finding your own pleasure, nor speaking your own words, then you shall delight yourself in the Lord. I will cause you to ride on the high hills of the earth and feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father. The mouth of the Lord has spoken. Now, I could have just read part of that, but I read the whole thing for context. God is talking to the prophet Isaiah. And he's telling Isaiah, I need you to tell this to Israel, and I need you to speak it loud, and I need you to speak it clear to them so that they can hear me and understand what I'm saying. He told them in chapter 57, the one before, the day of the Lord is drawing nigh to them. In other words, judgment is coming upon my people. And I need you to tell them this so they can hear it loud and clear. And if they do these things, I will spare judgment upon them. But if they don't listen, it's coming. And so he said the people are fasting. And they're telling God, we're afflicting our souls. We're doing what you said to do. We're fasting like you said, and yet you're mad at us. Why are you mad at us when we're doing what you asked us to do? And God told them, you are fasting. And you are afflicting your soul. But you haven't disciplined your body. You're fasting, and yet you're not feeding the poor. You're fasting, and yet you guys are smiting your servants and you're committing wickedness throughout the land. You're fasting, but you're not giving. You're going through the motions, but there's no righteousness inside of you. A lot of people who have been in church for a while and they say, I've been going to church, I don't feel anything. I've been serving God for all these years and I still am the same as when I started this thing. I'm doing all the right things. You've gone through all of the motions, but the relationship isn't there. You follow the steps without really know where you're going. So many people serve God for years going through the motions, and yet they lack relationship with God. He said, don't just give me your words when your hearts are far from me. See, a lot of people go through the works, but the heart, their hearts aren't in it. They serve God and they do all the right things because they want something from God. If I do this, then God's going to bless me. So I'm going to go through and do all of these things because I'm looking for God to bless me. It's not done out of love and devotion for God. It's done out of manipulation because I want you to do something for me. And if you don't do something for me, well, then I'm going to stop doing it because I didn't get what I wanted. And that's what God was saying. You're doing these things because you want to be seen. You're doing the things because you think it'll make me love you more. You don't care about me. You only care about you. We serve God not because of what I can get out of it. I didn't become a pastor because I wanted a title. I didn't become a pastor because I wanted to preach into a pulpit. Because let me tell you something, when you do it correctly, the devil puts a big old target on your back. It's about serving other people. In fact, I didn't even want to be a pastor. I told God, I'll do anything else. Just don't call me to do this. This is way too much for me. But I did it because my heart is to serve God. And I want to please God at all costs. And so he said, you're fasting, but you're doing it wrong, and you're doing it for the wrong reasons. And here is what I need you to do. So let's talk about what fasting is. The Hebrew word fast is the word sum. It's a fun word to say. Sum. T-S-U-M. Sum. And here's what the word means. It literally means to cover your mouth. And the idea of this in Hebrew was that when you fasted, you abstained from food. But it was more than just abstaining from food. We learned last week that in Hebrew, in ancient Hebrew, they used symbols to represent words and letters. And the symbol for the word sum is three parts to it. The first is a man kneeling. The second is a peg or nail, something that connects. And the third is water. And what it represents is that when you begin to humble yourself and you kneel before God in humility by covering your mouth, it connects you to heaven and it takes you deeper in God. Fasting was something that they did, and what it was originally intended for was to draw them closer to God. By covering my mouth and not feeding my flesh, it allows my spirit to draw closer to God. It's basically saying, I'm denying myself so that I can be closer to you. The heart of it was to turn from wickedness and turn back to God. Fasting was about rending your heart before God. The Bible says the heart is desperately wicked. Who can know it? People say things like, oh, you should follow your heart. No, you shouldn't, because it's wicked. The heart wants what the heart wants. Inside of our body, you might hear people use this term in the church long enough. Oh, my flesh. I'm struggling in my flesh. My flesh wants to do X, Y, and Z, and you might think, what does that even mean? I'm glad you asked. It's referring to the fact that we are a soul within a body. Our soul wants one thing, and our body wants something else. How many people in here like to eat? I do. Look at me. You can tell I like to eat. I don't miss many meals. I enjoy a good meal. We like to eat. How many people in here enjoy sleeping? Man, I enjoy a good nap. After church, I love to go home and just lay before the Lord on my bed with a blanket. We don't just enjoy those things, we need those things. We need to sleep. We need to eat. We need to drink. Those are all things that we need, and they're good things in moderation. But the body has inside of itself its own needs. But your spirit also has its own needs. And if you pay attention only to your physical needs, you neglect your spirit, and your spirit begins to grow weak and die. And so the idea is this: because our body has needs, and our body's needs are loud, and it craves things, and our heart craves things. And a lot of the time, the things that our heart craves are things that we don't want or even need. Let me rephrase that. It's things that we want and need, but in the right time. See, sometimes your body craves companionship, and there's nothing wrong with wanting companionship. In fact, the Bible told Adam and Eve to be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. That whole word, be fruitful and multiply, meant that, guess what? Adam and Eve, y'all gonna love each other, and that's okay, and I designed your body to do that. You are attracted to your wife, you're attracted to your husband, and that's a perfectly good thing, and it's a good need. But outside of marriage, it's not right. But because your flesh craves that companionship, it'll want it in the wrong time and in the wrong seasons. And when you do a right thing in the wrong season, guess what? It's still a wrong thing. Sometimes we get sad, or we get bombarded with memories from our past. And so in order to escape, we find outlets to numb and to dull our pain. Eating food's a good thing, but when you do it to escape or you gorge yourself, it then becomes a bad thing. And so our body has its own needs, but if we do not put those needs in check, those needs consume us. And before you know it, what God intended for good, the devil's using for evil, and it's drawing us further from God rather than closer. So how do you control what the body does? You shut it up by covering the mouth. See, the idea of covering the mouth means this. One, if I cover my mouth, there's something that I can't do. I can't talk. And so when you begin to cover the mouth of your flesh, guess what happens? It quits talking to you. It doesn't tell you everything that it wants. It can make suggestions. I can make noises. But it doesn't have the power that it once did over you. Some of you have been struggling with the same thing for years, and you ask God, Lord, how do I get victory over this? I've been praying and I've been reading, but how do I get victory? You haven't told your body no yet. Because when you fast and you abstain, your body grows weak. And in the process of the body becoming weak, guess what? Your spirit can grow strong. But if while fasting you're not praying and you're not reading, then guess what happens? You have just dieted. Congratulations. I hope you lose a few pounds. In the Bible, whenever they would fast, it was always accompanied with prayer. Mark 9:29, the disciples went to cast out a demon and they couldn't do it. And Jesus was able to cast out the demon. And they said, Lord, how come we couldn't do it? And he said, this kind comes not out but by prayer and fasting. There are some battles in your life that prayer alone cannot give you victory over. There are some things that you will struggle with that prayer alone cannot help you overcome. But when you tell the body no and you begin to sacrifice yourself before God, the spirit becomes strong and you can get victory. Fasting shows dependence on God. We give up what we want in order to get what God has for us. We deny ourselves and we tell ourselves no. Now, some people will say things like, well, I'm fasting from social media today. I haven't been on Facebook in a whole week. That is fantastic and that is wonderful, but it costs you little. See, when I fast from food, I'm also supposed to fast from everything else. Every other distraction needs to go. I'm not supposed to fast from food while I'm watching TV all day. It's not how it works. I'm not supposed to fast from food while scrolling through TikTok. Absolutely not. When I fast, I abstain from all other things so that I can feed the spiritual man. And when you begin to do those things, your flesh hates it. It wants to be entertained. It wants to be fed. It wants to be coddled. It wants what it wants, and when it doesn't get what it wants, something happens. It grows weak. And in the process of growing weak, your spirit man can stay strong. Which wolf will you feed? What will you give into? Which desires of yours will you play into? So often as Christians, we say, well, I've been doing this and I've been doing that and I've been praying, asking God for this. Nothing's happening in my life because you've prayed, but you haven't added fasting. See, there's something powerful that happens when you begin to humble yourself before God. You turn your plate upside down, you cover your mouth, and you allow the Spirit of God to speak to you. When you shut up and you allow God to speak into your life. You also know something amazing that happens when you cover your mouth. Nothing can come out of your mouth either. Sometimes what we have inside of us isn't what God has for us. And we go out and we spew all kinds of craziness out of our mouth. But when we fast, it puts our words even in check. Who, God, do you want me to be? Jesus himself fasted. So let's talk about why people fasted. One reason that people fasted in the Bible was to discipline their bodies. When my flesh was out of control and running rampant and I needed to put myself in check, I would fast so that I wouldn't get out of control. Another reason that people would fast was that when they wanted their prayers to be more impactful, they would mix fasting and prayer. And at that point, guess what? You have a weapon that can take down any stronghold that the enemy throws at you. God told them, is this not the fast that I have chosen? God said, if you do it my way, it will loose the bonds of wickedness. It will undo the heavy burdens. It will let the oppressed go free. It will break every yoke. If you're struggling, fast. If it feels like the enemy has a stronghold over you, it's time to fast. If it feels like you've been praying and you've been seeking God and you don't have an answer and you don't know what else to do and you don't know where else to go, it's time to turn the plate upside down. It's time to cover your mouth. It's time to seek God in a way you've never sought God before, because in those moments, power comes that you wouldn't have any other time because you're too distracted. If you want true freedom, God said, this is the fast I've prepared for you. They would fast when it came to making decisions. When Jesus fasted right before his public ministry, he fasted right before he chose the 12. He sought God before making a big decision in his life. How many of you, before making big decisions, fast and pray? Before we moved to Florida, we fasted. We fasted and we prayed and we fasted and we prayed and we waited for God to answer. And then I heard God answer, but I didn't like the answer. So I kept fasting and praying even more. And as I was fasting and praying, I was like, okay, God, this. And God said, I've already told you what to do. Stop asking me what to do and start telling me to get you ready for the new assignment. I didn't like that answer. I was content to stay where I was. But in fasting, I could hear him very clearly. And I knew exactly what it is he wanted me to do. With me and Danielle, it was in the earlier parts of our marriage. I had been working multiple jobs while I was in college. I worked as a tire technician, and I also worked at UPS unloading trucks. In the morning, I would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I would go to UPS. I would unload trucks. I would then shower. I would go to class. And then after class, I would come and I would go work in a tire shop. Working multiple jobs was exhausting. And I was just about to graduate from college. And me and her were just about to get married. I graduated in June of 2009. We were getting married in September of 2009. And I went before God and I said, I don't know what to do now. I tried to get promoted at UPS and I couldn't pass this stupid test they kept making me take. I was like, you need me to take a test to be a leader, and yet you have leaders here that have passed the test and they're terrible leaders. It doesn't make sense to me. And I said, God, what do you want me to do? I am about to be a college-educated person, and yet I cannot find a full-time job. And I was one of those people that went into a career, and when you got out of the career, if you didn't go get another degree, guess what? You weren't going to make much money starting out. But they don't tell you that when you start college. And so I didn't know what to do. So me and Danielle got together and we said, we are months away from getting married. We have to have a place to live. I have to be able to afford to pay all of our bills and everything else. And so me and her said, we're going to fast for 3 days. And we went on a 3-day fast together. Around day 2, I went to my job at the tire shop. I walked into work, and our regional vice president was there. And he shows up and he calls me into the office and said, hey, you, come here. And I was like, goodness gracious, I'm asking God for a miracle, and here I am about to get fired. And I go into the office, and I sit down. And he said, you were at this training last week, weren't you? And I said, yeah, I did. And he said, my phone has not stopped ringing since this training. Do you know how many store managers called me and told me that there was this tire tech that came to training and he needs to be a full-time manager with this company? And I said, nope, didn't know that. And my manager is sitting right there and he's grinning at me. And what's funny is that my manager that was sitting there grinning at me, he was a witch. He was a Wiccan, and he was proud the fact that he was a Wiccan. And every day he would come into work, he would try to make my life miserable because he knew that I was a Christian, and I carried a briefcase that had a Bible inside of it. And he would always come up to me and ask me these questions, and he would try to get me to slip up and mess up, or he would do things to provoke me to try to make me angry. And one day I remember we were in the break room, and he came up to me, and he said, tell me I'm going to hell. And I said, I'm not telling you that. And he looked at me and said, tell me that I'm going to hell, Marcus. And I said, I'm not going to tell you you're going to hell. He goes, so I am a witch. I do not serve your God. And you mean to tell me that you won't tell me that I'm going to hell? Why not? And I said, because God changes people. And I don't know where you're going, because when God gets a hold of you, he'll change you and transform you, and you're not going to hell. I can't tell you that. And he said, if I die now in this break room, am I going to hell? And I said, yeah, well, of course. And he goes, thank you. And I said, but you're not dead yet. And he storms out angry at me. And he's looking at me as this regional vice president's talking, and he's grinning at me. And I said, what does this mean? And he says, we want to promote you to manager. Do you accept? And I said, well, what does that mean? I said, I'm part-time. They go, this will be a full-time salaried position. I said, I just graduated from college. I have a degree in psychology. I didn't think I was going to be the manager of a tire shop. Do you want it? Yeah, I'm about to get married. Absolutely, I want this. And I called Danielle and I said, remember how we've been fasting and praying about my job situation and what I was going to do? And I didn't know, and I was trying to be a manager at UPS. The tire company just called me and they offered me a management position. And I said, look at God. Prayer wasn't enough, but when we added fasting, man, God moved. And he moved in a way that I didn't expect, because I was not expecting to manage a tire shop. And my boss, who was a witch, he came in one day and he said, hey, I got to talk to you. Or he said, I need to talk to you. Come here, come here, come here. And I said, okay, what happened? And he said, so my father-in-law is a pastor. And I was like, what did you do to this man? And he said, I was at his church last night. And I said, I just want you to know that I gave my heart to God. And I was like, oh my goodness. And he said, I know you've been praying for me. And I just wanted you to know that I accepted Christ. Fasting not only impacts you, but when you live a life of fasting, it impacts those that are around you. See, and Hebrew culture, fasting wasn't something they just did occasionally. But in the New Testament church, it became a practice that they would do weekly. They were fasting weekly. Why? Because they had to keep themselves pressed down. Because they had a job to do from the Lord. Fasting helps us to fight spiritual warfare. 2 Corinthians 10:3-5 says this, "For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for pulling down strongholds, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ." We try so hard to fight spiritual battles with physical means. We try so hard to confront things physically when it's really not a physical problem. It's something that's happening spiritually. Bible says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." The problem isn't your children. The problem isn't your spouse. The problem isn't the person on your job. The problem isn't your neighbor. The problem is the spirit that is inside of them that is attacking you. And the only way to get victory over these types of enemies isn't with prayer alone, but when you turn your plate upside down and cover your mouth and seek the face of God, something happens on the inside and strength rises up within you. The Holy Spirit feels power like it's never known, and you can break every stronghold, break every chain, destroy every yoke. Why? Because you're feeding the right thing. You're feeding the right wolf. Praise team, would you come up here? Fasting shouldn't be something optional. Fasting isn't something that we do because we're in a crisis situation. No, you can and you should fast in a crisis situation. Moses fasted for 40 days before he received the 10 commandments. Joshua fasted 40 days before he became the commander of Israel's army. Israel fasted for 3 days before Queen Esther went before the king. Throughout Scripture, right before big changes happened within the nation, the people would fast. In Scripture, right before big ministries were launched forth, people fasted. Fasting wasn't optional and it wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. And it was something that should be engaged in weekly. And some of you may be saying, "Pastor, I have diabetes. I can't do that. I can't fast for long periods of time." Guess what? God knows your body's limitations. If I can only fast 3 hours, but I spend those 3 hours in prayer and fasting, then give God the best 3 hours you can possibly give. If you can only fast and pray for 2 hours and give God the 2 hours. If you can only fast from midnight until noon, then give God from midnight until noon. Typically, they would fast from sun up to sundown. That's how the Hebrews would fast. Some people fast from midnight till 4 p.m. However you choose to do it, that's personal. But what's important is that you turn the plate upside down, you cover your mouth, and you spend time with God. If you got an hour before your sugar spikes, and give God an hour. But you got to give God something. Not just once in a while, once in a blue moon. It should be a part of what we do spiritually. Fast weekly, fast monthly, but don't forget to fast. Fast before you make a big decision. Fast when things seem overwhelming and you don't know what to do and you don't know how to gain victory. Fast when your flesh is causing you to go and to do things that you don't really even want to do. And you say, "Lord, I've been praying and I've been seeking you, but I can't get victory over this one area of my life." Cover your mouth, humble yourself before God, and seek His face. Let me tell you why I fast. 1 Corinthians 9:24 and 27 reads like this. The Apostle Paul is writing to the church at Corinth. And he says this, do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it. And everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. In other words, these people are competing for a prize that's going to fade away. If you're in a race, everybody runs their hardest. Everybody gives their all. Everyone is striving for the prize at the end. Only one wins, but they're all pushing to try to get victory in the race. And he says they're doing this for a crown that's going to fade away. Now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but I'm doing this for an imperishable crown. I'm doing this not for what's in earth, but for what's in heaven. Paul says, therefore I run not with uncertainty. I don't run this Christian race thinking that only one person wins, and when I get to the end, I may or may not obtain a prize. But he says, I run this race knowing that when I make it to the end of my life, there's something waiting for me at the end. I run not with uncertainty. Thus I fight not as one who beats the air. In other words, he says, I'm not a shadow boxer. I'm not just out here doing stuff with no real enemy, with no real competition. I'm not just out here going through the motions. But he says, I discipline my body and I bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. He said, every day I discipline myself. I train my body not as someone who's shadow boxing. I don't do it so that I can win a perishable crown, but I do this every day, that when I get to the end of my life and I meet Jesus face to face, I can say I gave everything that I had and I'm going to win. But if I don't learn how to discipline this body of mine, if I don't put it into subjection, another translation reads this. He says, I beat my body and I make it my slave, lest at any time I preach to other people, when I get to the end, I don't make it. I refuse to live my life preaching the gospel and get to the end of the race. And God said, depart from me, you worker of iniquity, I never knew you.